Oh, yeah. Welcome to Sonetta Studios. It don't get no better than consciousness info. Sonetta TV7. You keep it hot 24/7. You got that back for 102. Sonetta TV2. Yeah.
You are now inside Sonetta Studios, the House of Consciousness production. Black news presentation. Sonetta. Sonetta.
Oh, yeah.
Peace. Assalamu alaikum. Hotep. Namaste. Jambo. Ashe. All the greetings of love and light to the darkest minds of the light. I am Napah Shadah. And I'm so glad for all of you who are joining us. I'm so glad you're here. Please don't forget to hit the like and share this live stream. It should be very interesting. Today, we are going to be blessed to have the author, the researcher, the code breaker, the teacher, the detective, Ralph Ellis. I'd like to call him a Bible scholar. I don't know if he considers himself a Bible scholar, but Ralph Ellis is joining us today. I've been wanting for a long time to bring him on, to sit with him and talk to him about some of the new ideas that I have, and also have him share some of the information that he has uncovered about the Bible and ancient history. So without further ado, welcome, Ralph Ellis.
Good to be back on your show, Napah.
Yes, peace. Thank you so much for being here. So Ralph, there's so much we can talk about, so I'm going to pace myself. For those who are not familiar with you, even though I want to bring you on to the Cam Up, we have another show, another channel called Cam Up, and it's all about you, all about your history, all about who you are. But for those who are not really familiar with you, let them know what you actually specialize in.
Well, I call it revisionary theology. So looking at the history of the Bible, the Old Testament, New Testament, from a historical perspective. So I'm looking at this from a Gnostic atheist sort of perspective. So I have no particular leanings one way or the other regard the Gospels, and trying to put them back into history because all of these stories are missing from the historical record. People find excuses for that, but it's a fact that all of these stories, although they appear historical, cannot be found in the historical record. So the idea from the very beginning, and I started this, I started this when I was 14, so
Wow.
like 40 years ago or more. No, that's sort of hitting nearly 50 years ago now. So
Wow.
I started at a very young age, and I started actually writing books in 97. And the idea was to try and put this information back into the historical record. And I've been fairly successful, I think, in doing so.
Yes.
Simply by putting alternate translations onto what the Gospels say, sometimes altering the date, sometimes altering the location, but finding all of these events back in the historical record. And most of the Old Testament, of course, links up with Egypt. Most of this story happened in Egypt. And the only difference between the story that I have teased out of the Old Testament and what is normally considered normal is that my characters tend to be more important. So they tend to be pharaohs of Egypt, real important people within Egypt. But then, curiously, the Bible says sort of similar things anyway. When you come to Joseph, of course, he was the prime minister of Egypt. When you come to Moses, he was the chief army commander. of Egypt. So even within the biblical text, they do consider these people to be very important on some occasions.
Mhm.
But on other occasions, they say, oh, they're just mere poor shepherds. But
Right.
of course, I don't believe that. I think they were the shepherd kings because we had this line of shepherd kings within Egyptian history. So perhaps we might touch on that later.
Oh,
So that's
yes.
what I've been doing over the last 40 years or so.
Oh, yes. You have written dozens, and I mean, when I say dozens, dozens of books. I was just want to read some of the titles: Jesus, the Last of the Pharaohs; Cleopatra to Christ, the King Jesus trilogy, book one; King Jesus from Egypt, Cam to Camelot; Thoth, Architect of Universe; Eden in Egypt. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. That's just a small portion of your authorship. So let's talk. You said some things about. I'm listen. I'm excited to talk to you because I recently did a debate about Kemet, the priesthood, the Kemetic priesthood, and the Levitical priesthood. And I saw so many similarities that I just came to the conclusion in my little research that Kemet is the prototype of the Levitical, the Kemetic priesthood is the prototype to the Levitical priesthood. Can you speak to us a little bit about that? What your take is on it?
Yeah, it all came out of Egypt. So, yes, there will be many links between the two. And many of the ancient texts of Egypt have found their way into the biblical texts. Um, like um, the um, uh, the doctrine of Amenhotep and so on. All of
Proverbs.
these ancient texts, they have their equivalent within the biblical story. The famous one, I suppose, is the hymn to the Arton,
Mm.
which has found its way into Psalm 104. Now, the hymn to the Arton was written by Pharaoh Akhenaten himself,
Oh, wow.
apparently, and it's a hymn to the dawning of a new day, and yet it's sitting there in Psalms. So it's quite obvious that the Egyptian scribes knew of a lot of Egyptian history and included it within their text. Now, the question is, why would that be so? I think it's because we know the Israelites were in Egypt. I think they were rather more important within Egypt than is often made out. So I have equated Akhenaten and his brother Moses with Aaron and Moses from the Exodus story,
Wow.
because the brother of Akhenaten was called Moses. Now, if that's so, and there's many reasons for thinking so, then a lot of that theology from Akhenaten will have found its way into Israelite thinking and Judaic history. And I think that has actually happened. And that's why you see these similarities between the two.
Wow. So you are really helping my argument because you're giving more information. I didn't cover the part about Akhenaten because I think that's been a lot of people, including you, have spoken about that and shown that Akhenaten could possibly be tied to Moses. I did see a lot of information saying that possibly Hatshepsut. How do you, that's how you say, Hatshepsut could be the mother of Moses. Have you heard that before? Of the biblical Moses?
Yes, I've heard that. A lot of people have tried to put this story back into Egypt because, obviously, like yourself, they have seen the similarities, and they know the Israelites came out of Egypt, and so there's been a search for a long, long time to try and find those Israelites within Egypt because they're not easy to find there. But I went, I saw the similarities with the Exodus immediately,
Right. I want you
but
to speak
later,
on your take on the Exodus for the audience.
yes. Um, well, this came about because I was reading Josephus,
Okay.
Josephus Flavius being Judaism's greatest historian. And Josephus Flavius said that the Israelites were the Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt.
Mm.
Now, everyone has ignored that. You know, you look into standard historical texts, religious texts, nobody will really mention that. I tried to put it into Wiki and it was deleted on like 12 or 15 occasions
Wow.
before we managed to get it to stick. Even just a little quote from Josephus was so contentious that they were deleting it all the time.
Wow.
But it's a truism that Josephus Flavius says that the Israelites, our people as he calls them, were the Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt. Now, if people don't know what the Hyksos were, they were a little bit like the Israelites. They were an invading force that came down into Egypt from Mesopotamia. This would be circa sort of 2000 odd BC. And they eventually took over most of Egypt. So they became pharaohs themselves, even though they weren't Egyptian to start with. But they became fully Egyptianized as well. You wouldn't really tell the difference between the two. All of their texts, you know, they speak Egyptian, they write Egyptian, they appear to be Egyptian. But they were the Hyksos. They were a slightly different people. They venerated slightly different gods. They tended to like Seth more than Osiris, you know, things of that nature. But anyway, later on, they had a civil war because there was contention between these two groups, between the Hyksos and the traditional, you know, priesthood and pharaohs of Egypt. And they had this civil war. Now, I think the civil war was something to do with the eruption of Thera, Santorini in the Mediterranean, because it all happened at the same time. So again, if people don't know what Santorini is, it's an island just to the north of Crete, which exploded
It was a
in,
volcano, correct?
yeah, a big volcano, a maritime volcano. It was the center of the Minoan Empire, and it exploded in, I'm just trying to remember exactly when it was, 1600 BC. And we're fairly confident about that because it's been well documented and carbon dated. So we think it exploded in 1600 BC. Now, the great civil war between the Hyksos and the Egyptians happened in 1580. So just like 20 years later, they had this big civil war and an exodus. So they had an exodus, a big exodus of like, you know, 250,000 people or whatever. And that exodus just happens to be exactly the same as the Israelite exodus. So what happened? Well, this all comes from history. This comes from real history as we know it. So in about 1580 BC, there was a group of people who were called shepherds because the Hyksos were known as the shepherd kings. So they were shepherds. They wore earrings and curly side locks of hair, and they were circumcised. They had a war with the Egyptians. There was darkness for 3 days. There was a great ash fall, which does equate, if you remember from the Exodus account, God says unto Moses, take you handfuls of ash from the hearth of the fire and cast it up into the sky, and it will become small dust over the whole land of Egypt. Well, that actually happened in 1580 BC with the Hyksos Exodus because of the volcano, of course. So yeah, there was darkness for 3 days. There was this big ash fall. There was a pillar of fire. There was a pillar of smoke. And one of the kings of these people, of the Hyksos people, was called Jacob. Jacobah was one of their kings.
So that was an
And
actual name of one of the Hyksos kings.
pharaohs, yeah. One of the pharaohs was called Jacobah. Well, in fact, two of them
Wow.
were. There was Jacobam and Jacob something else.
Mhm.
So they have even the same names. And there was this great exodus. And they went on this exodus, and there was a great parting of the waters. So the water did part, just as it says in the biblical text. It was a tsunami. So all of those events that happened. Oh, and of course, it was the Hyksos who destroyed Jericho. So in their exodus across towards Judea, it was the Hyksos people, the shepherd pharaohs, who destroyed Jericho. So all of these events link up rather perfectly with the biblical exodus. They're exactly the same. The only difference, of course, is that it happened like 350 years earlier. It happened in 1580 BC, not in the sort of, they normally say about 1150 or so in the Ramesside period, BC. But rather than being a problem, that is actually a solution because, historians and theologians have looked at the Exodus for hundreds of years, well, at least a couple of hundred years, and they've never been able to find any evidence. And the reason they couldn't find any evidence was that they were looking in the wrong era. So you get this stratigraphy, of course, within history, within Egypt, and you look through the stratigraphy, and you're looking for that sort of 12th century BC era, and you can't find any evidence for the Exodus. Well, of course you can't, because it happened in 1580 BC.
Okay.
Oh, and there's another similarity here. The Hyksos left Egypt from Pi-Ramesse and went to Jerusalem.
Okay.
Familiar? The only difference is, of course, within the Hyksos Exodus, it wasn't called Pi-Ramesse. It changed its name. They left from R.I.S.E. But R.I.S.E. is Pi-Ramesse. It's the same city. It changed its name later on.
Oh, I see.
And
Because
they went
avarice is
from,
where the Hyksos, that would be like Goshen of the Bible, right? Avarice. Like,
in the Bible, the Exodus left from Pi-Ramesse. That was
in
the
the
city they
Bible?
left from. Yeah, that's what it says, Pi-Ramesse.
So is that where the Hyksos lived, though, in Avarice?
That was their capital city. Yeah, it was called Avarice when they lived there, but yeah, it's the same city. It's
Right,
Pi-Ramesse.
same city. Let me ask you if you're familiar with Richard, I think it's Richard Friedman. He talks about a significantly smaller group of people be in the Exodus. He does go into some more detail, but I want you to talk about. I brought him up because I also saw some of his information. I love your
Well,
information, by the way,
he
but
he
his
would
information.
have to say so. This is typical of modern historians and theologians. He would have to say so because there is no evidence for the Exodus. And
Right.
one
So
of
you're
the ways
familiar with him?
around this is you
Are you
say, oh, it
familiar
was
with him?
so small, we would never be able to detect them in the historical record. That's why we
Right.
can't find them.
Yeah,
No,
he does
not
say that.
so.
He says that.
Um, the reason you can't find them is because you're looking in the wrong era.
Okay.
If you look at 1580 BC, there was a huge exodus of something like 250,000 people who went to
Oh,
Jerusalem.
wow.
It just
250,000?
happened. Oh, yes, the Hyksos exodus was supposed to be massive. It was enormous, just as the Israelite exodus was also. I think the Torah says something like 350,000
It
people.
says, yeah, it's around that number. It's a little bit, I thought it was 600,000, but
It
it's a
could be.
huge number of people.
Yeah, some people multiply it up because they say it must have included children and women as well, and
Yes.
therefore
Yes.
they multiply it by two, sort of thing. But yes, it was supposed to be an enormous number of people, but that did actually happen during the Hyksos Exodus, the Hyksos shepherd kings.
Okay. So he's making an argument more about the Levitical, the tribe of Levi. And so just wanted to talk to you about that. I want to get into because I noticed with a lot of your work and even with the Bible, Kemet, Egypt is such a large part of all of the Bible, for even from the Torah to well, not to Revelation, but at least to the epistles of Paul. I do want you to get into your linking Paul to Josephus, but talk to us about the significance of Kemet in the Bible. Like, it's all through, and of course, all of your book, a lot of your books
Well,
show us that.
that is where they lived. I mean, they lived in Egypt. So and Kemet is Egypt. So a lot
Mhm.
of their theology, a lot of their history came out of Egypt. And so, time and time again, if you're looking at links with Israelite history and Israelite theology, um, uh, it's um, it's going to link up with aspects of Egyptian history. I mean, for instance, if you look at the Genesis story, the
Mhm.
Genesis story says that a river ran through um, the Garden of Eden, and then it was parted and became four branches.
Right.
Well, there is only one river that does that, and that's the Nile.
Wow. Wow.
And the Garden of the Arten, we were talking about Akhenaten recently. The
Hmm.
pharaohs all had a garden, a sacred garden dedicated to the
Eden,
gods.
Autumn. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, precisely. And
Wow.
so there is a direct link between Eden and the Arten. There was a garden of the Arten. It belonged to Pharaoh Akhenaten. More than that, the god of the Israelites is called the Arden. Now, a lot of people don't know that because, all they know is Yahweh, but the God of the Israelites was known as Yahweh, um, Shaddai, Elohim, and Adon. And of
Adonai.
course,
Yeah.
Adonai. And of
Wow.
course, Adon was the god of Pharaoh Akhenaten. You can either pronounce his god as Aton, or it was sometimes spelt as Ardon, Adonai. And if you pronounce it properly, because it was spelt with a double reed glyph, and so the proper pronunciation is Eton or Eden.
That's
There is a direct confluence there with Eden and with the Israelite god, the Adonai. It comes from Pharaoh Akhenaten. Remember, Pharaoh Akhenaten was the first of the monotheists. Now, who
yes.
in history, in biblical history, was the first of the monotheists? It was the Israelites.
Yeah,
Where did they,
Moses.
yeah, where did they get their monotheism from? I think they got it from Akhenaten.
So do
So
I.
yeah, there's direct linkages. In fact, I link it up even further because what I say is the Genesis story has been misplaced. Um, if you read the Genesis story critically, it is very, very similar to the hymn to the Arten. So the hymn to the Arten is about the dawning of a new day, not the creation of the world, but a dawning of a new day. So the sun coming over the horizon and illuminating the land and all of the animals coming back to life. So they weren't being created, they were just coming back to life because it was the
Mm.
dawning of a new day. But
Wow. Like
essentially
resurrection.
that story is very, very similar to the Genesis story. And so what I've said is because who on earth were Adam and Eve? I think because of all of this came out of the Amana dynasty, all of this information, I think Adam and Eve were actually Pharaoh Akhenaten and Nefertiti because they were the two naked lovebirds in the Garden of Eden. Because if you look at any of the iconography of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, they are always naked. And perhaps
Mm.
we could have a look at that actually, if I can.
Sure. Share your screen. And
Yeah,
you make sense because I the more I study, I'm like, this Bible is coming out of Kemet. And then people always want to say, well, no, there's other stories, but the Kemetic stories are so close to the Israelite stories. So let me know when you want to screen share, and I
yeah,
definitely
I'm
will.
just picking out the images I've want. So I've got about half a dozen images here. So if I open them up,
Wow.
Okay, so I have my images. Let me just knock that out of the way so I can make it smaller. And I have to put it in the same page as where you are. So that's you. So I've got it in the right place. So let's go to settings. Oh, no, I don't want settings. I want present.
You want to go to present. Present.
Yeah, I don't know why it's called present. It's rather, yeah.
Instead of
Rather silly
share,
name.
it used to be share, but they want to make it
Oh,
more,
did it? Right.
you know.
Okay, share screen. I want to share a window. I want to share that window. So, okay, let's share that window.
Okay.
And okay, so that should be the first of the images. And this is the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. Again, the imagery comes straight out of Egypt.
Now, where is this wall? Where is this at?
This is in Karnak,
Karnak,
in
yes.
southern Egypt, in
Okay.
Upper Egypt. And you can see that the Pharaoh here, this is Seti the First, is plucking the fruits from the tree.
Yes.
Familiar story. This is exactly what Eve was blamed for doing. Now, what are these fruits? These fruits contain the name of the Pharaoh. Each one has got his own hieroglyph on it. In this case of Seti the First. So these fruits upon the tree of life contained the names of the pharaohs. It was a family tree. It was a history of the pharaohs of Egypt, all with fruits on a tree. In fact, if you go around some of the big houses in Britain, you will actually see the family tree of that particular aristocrat actually on a tree. They draw it as a big tree with all of the family members hanging off this tree. And that's exactly what we have here. And this, I think, is the tree of life from the Garden of Eden, the garden of the god Aten or Eden. And so, yes, this comes straight out of Egyptian history. Nothing particular.
And Ralph, if I may add, I see the god Tehuti, Thoth, and he's the god of wisdom. So that would be the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the tree of wisdom.
Yes. Absolutely, you've got it. You've nailed it on the head. But he's also the god of writing. So you can see him writing here with his stylus. Just here, he's actually writing the name of the pharaoh on the fruits of the tree.
Wow, I see that. That's awesome.
And this was the tree that Eve was blamed for plucking these fruits out of. Essentially, what they were saying is you're destroying the name of the pharaoh. You're plucking that fruit off and throwing it away, perhaps. Therefore, you are killing that pharaoh. You are throwing his name into the dirt. And that's exactly what Akhenaten was doing. Remember, he was the heretic pharaoh who was closing down all of the temples.
Doing iconoclasm too.
Totally, yeah. He was cutting out the images of the old gods. So yes, Akhenaten was doing this in a big way down in Thebes. He was actually cutting out the images of the gods, not just the names of the old pharaohs. And that's, I think, what they were blamed for doing. And that is the history of Adam and Eve.
Wow.
So this is that's one of the this ancient history got into the Bible. This is the admonishments of Amenemopet, I think. Anyway, this text found itself into the biblical texts. There's quite a few Egyptian texts have migrated into there. This is just an image of Akhenaten himself with his exaggerated features. This is his cartouche. So this is can you see my cursor there going around?
Yes, we see it perfectly.
The bird is K. This is a K, and the wavy line is a N. So there's K, N, and then It, N. So Iten, or Eden, because it's spelt with the reed glyph, and the reed glyph can be an E rather than an A. So that could be Iten.
Yes, I see
And
that.
you can also spell that name. Sometimes they put the hand here, which is a D, and so sometimes it's spelt as Eden,
Wow.
Akeneden.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I love that because, I found something else. I wanted to, it's great to talk to you. I haven't been able to speak to you for a minute. So I found something out about, well, let me let you finish going through these and then I want to talk to you. I don't want to,
Oh yeah,
because you
yeah.
have more. What about the,
Well, we were just talking about Adam and Eve being the two naked lovebirds in the Garden of Eden. Well, so were Akhenaten and Nefertiti. So this is their statues, and as you can see, they used to walk around naked in the Garden of Eden. And
yes.
this is Akhenaten on the left, and he is naked, um, and with a sort of feminine body form, which he was renowned for having.
Why do you think that he's always depicted in a very feminine body form?
Because this is the form that he thought the gods took.
I
So
see.
this is, and we do the same today.
Like androgynous?
Yes, absolutely. As you
I
can
see.
see, he's androgynous. He's neither male nor female.
Right.
He's naked here with no genitalia.
Mm-hmm.
But we do exactly the same today. If you look at the standard Hollywood alien, is always a grey, and the
Mm-hmm.
grey looks just like Akhenaten.
Yes.
With the exaggerated, you can't see it. I might have another picture further down with the exaggerated features,
Right.
um,
Like a
with the sort of
caricature of him. Very
yeah, the
caricature.
triangular shaped head and everything. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very, very similar. And Akhenaten was doing the same. So this wasn't his real body form at all. He asked his sculptors to make himself look like this.
Yes,
The
I've
one in the
heard.
middle is this is Nefertiti
Yes.
in middle age. Now, she must have asked again her sculptors to portray her like this. I mean, no sculptor would dare um, portray the queen to be naked if they hadn't been asked to do so. So
Right.
you can see that these Akhenaten and Nefertiti were sort of like a couple of hippies down in their new city at Amarna. And this must have been quite shocking to people. This is why people wrote about it. This would be the equivalent of, um, say, Obama and Michelle in America wandering through the White House stark naked.
Right.
And not only that, but actually going to ceremonies, giving awards to her people stark naked.
Yes.
It would be like the former Queen of England before she died, appearing at Buckingham Palace
Nude.
stark naked.
Right.
This must have been quite shocking to some people, even in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, this was notable. But when they were kicked out of Amarna, because remember the Amarna experiment failed and they were kicked out of there, they would have had to have covered up and put some clothes on,
Of course.
just
Yeah.
as it says in the Gospel in the Genesis account. The one on the
Oh,
right
I
here
see. Yeah.
is one of the daughters of uh, Nefertiti.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, that is all part of the story, and I think actually Adam and Eve um, probably wasn't Nefertiti. I think it was Akhenaten and Kia.
Oh,
Kia was his second wife.
yes. But she doesn't
Um,
have any nude depictions of herself.
no, we have very few depictions of her because I think she was not greatly liked. So we have a couple of images of her head, and that's about it, I think. Um, but the interesting thing about Kia is she has the same name as Eve. Now, we read it as Eve in the English, of course, but that's not her name. In the Hebrew Aramaic, it's actually Kava. Kava?
Chava, like Eve. Chava.
Kava? Yeah, well, through the Greek, it eventually became Eve. But Kava and Kia, it's almost the same name.
But Chava in the Hebrew, it's Eve. I was showing the correlate the connection between like Hava and Haya, and Chava is even. So you're right. I'm saying
Mm.
Chava is actually the Hebrew for Eve.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And
Yes.
that is the same name as
Nakia.
Akhenaten's second wife.
Yeah, I can
So
see that.
yeah, it's yeah, it's interesting. This next picture is just this is the pillar of smoke, from the Exodus story, the pillar of fire and the pillar of smoke. Well, this is a real pillar of smoke, of course. This is a volcano from recent era. That's exactly what they saw, and that's what they wrote about: the pillar of fire and the pillar of smoke. Um, this is just an image of the Mediterranean basin. So Egypt is down here, and the island that exploded is up here.
What's the distance?
That is, it's got to be at least 500 miles.
Oh, that okay.
Um, so it's quite a long way. But of course, these tsunamis travel for great distances before they break upon a shore. So that's not really a problem. Um, they wouldn't have seen the pillar of fire from Egypt, but any sailors in that region would have seen this great pillar of fire and pillar of smoke and brought this story back to Egypt and said, look, this is going on over in the middle of the Mediterranean somewhere. So people would have written about it. Um,
Mm. I
but
mean,
the,
go ahead.
sorry, say again.
No, I was going to say there's other documentation about Krakatoa and the distance with the people. I don't know exactly how far it was, but there were people in surrounding islands who were they were destroyed from
Oh,
just
yes.
that. So yes, that is possible.
Yeah, and the Minoan Empire, of course, never recovered either. The Minoan Empire was largely destroyed. Um,
Mhm.
but the fact that the Exodus story has all of these elements, which you might call black swan elements, elements that are so unusual you could never make up the story. But the Exodus story has like 4 or 5 of these black swans, all in the same story. They've got the pillar of fire, the pillar of smoke, they've got the ash fall, the 3 days of darkness, and the tsunami, the parting of the waters. Now, how would an ancient chronicler know that all of those elements are linked to a maritime volcano? You
And
could not
how?
make up that story with all of those elements all in one story. It's just impossible. The only way you could make that story is if this was an eyewitness account of what actually happened and there was
Mhm.
someone there actually recording it. And that is what went into the Exodus story. That's why I think this is truly what it was all about. So, yeah, I think that's all I've got here for the Exodus. So I'll come out of share.
And
Um,
which of your books would you say you cover with the ones I can look at your list? You have a book on the Exodus. I have to see
yes,
where
that will
Tempest and
mostly be
Exodus.
in Tempest
Tempest
and
and
Exodus.
Exodus. Yes.
Yes, mostly
Okay.
in that book.
So
Um,
if you could just 1 second, if the mods, thank you so much. I see you out there, Max and Tahuti. And if you could just drop the links to the books that are discussed and any other books that Ralph has out
mm.
there for you to do your research. But anyway, go ahead, Ralph. You were going to speak. You were going to say something.
Yeah, with the books, try and get the sort of 2017 or later editions because they were updated in 2017 with new images and some extra texts and so on. So, yeah, the modern editions are the better ones. Yeah. So where did we get to? We got to Akhenaten and Nefertiti
Yes,
as being the progenitors of
Genesis.
much of the Torah account. And
Hmm.
so, yes, we will see many of these links with Egypt because it came out of Egypt. But that is largely dismissed nowadays. As I said, Josephus Flavius actually says this happened. But most people would just ignore that, or they make excuses for why Akhenaten is, why Josephus is wrong. I mean, I was even having a bit of a debate with Bitak, one of the Egyptian archaeologists. He's been working in Egypt for like 40, 50 years. He's still going, and he's still looking for the Exodus.
Wow.
After 50 years, and of course he can't find it because he's looking in the wrong era. And I was mentioning this, and he didn't seem to know that Josephus says that the Israelites were the Hyksos. And so he wrote this little article saying how Josephus was probably mistaken. And you think, hold on a minute, as an open-minded archaeologist, surely you'll take in all of the data that is available to you.
Right.
And he wasn't. He was excluding it. And then I thought about it, and then I thought, the reason is probably political. This is the trouble. Politics gets in the way of everything, not just religion, but politics, because he's working in Egypt under the directions of the Egyptian Council of, Archaeology and whatever.
Yes.
If he said that the Jews, the Israelites, ruled Egypt during the Hyksos era, that's not going to go down very well within Egypt. And so you can see he's probably actually constrained about what he can actually say.
Of course, yeah. Plus they're Muslim. They're Muslim, and they don't want to make put the Jews, so-called Jews, in power in history. Yeah.
Yeah. You can see the problem. Yeah. And so politically, he has to deny it, even if he can probably see it himself as being a possibility. They have to deny it. I had the same discussion with Professor Finkelstein, who's an eminent archaeologist in Israel, written a lot of very good books, which I would say are on the secular side. He's not terribly religious himself, but of course he is a Jewish historian working in Israel. And so I told him about my King David and King Solomon identification, which again puts these people back into Egypt as being Egyptian pharaohs.
Ralph, can you speak on that? Now let's go into that.
Yeah, yes, we can do that. But just to finish this little story, he said, just because they all have the same names doesn't mean they are the same people. Yeah, but if they all have the same names, perhaps that's an indication that is something that we should be, considering and following and having a look at. Let me have a look at.
That's a big deal. I mean, if the names are the same, you would have to look into it. Did you freeze? I think you're frozen. Uh-oh. Just when it was getting good. I think we have some technical difficulties. We're streaming. He's actually streaming from the UK. So while he tries to, Ralph, if you can hear me, you can go out and come back in. Hopefully we can get you back in here. He is a fountain of information. Look, if you don't have to agree with it, but just do your own research. I see some people in the chat, adding their input, which I appreciate very much. So he's going to go out and come back in. So I love his information, though. I love when any scholar goes and does research and looks beneath the surface. I actually met Ralph. We developed our professional relationship through a mutual friend of ours, and that is our dear friend, Esoteric Thoughts. Esoteric Thoughts. So please also go subscribe to Esoteric Thoughts. You can see a lot of Ralph's interviews on there. I've actually spoken with Ralph, sat down with Ralph. Listen, he has so much information. I hope he's I hope his connection is okay and he can come back in. He has so much information. Oh, and I interviewed him on the Killer Priest podcast. What I love about him is that he's always willing to sit down and share. He's back. Yes, here we are.
Yes.
Yes, the
Yes.
rabbi is back.
Back from the dead. We're here again.
Awesome. So you were mid sentence, and then we're going to go into your research on Solomon and David. So what were you saying?
Yes. Yes. Let's have a look at Solomon and David. I will grab some photos while we're at it. So if I get my preview, and I shall open some images. So let's have a look at Solomon and Hiram, and we'll open some of those.
Now Hiram is Hiram, right?
Yes,
Hiram,
Hiram Abif.
Hiram Abith. Yes, Hiram
Oh,
Abith.
that,
Now, everyone, when they hear that, the ones who are doing all the Illuminati research are like, Illuminati.
yeah, that one. Yes, it's central to. Yes, we can talk about that as well. It's central to Masonic history as well.
Yes, and you know what? I just want to say, I'm always trying to flex and show you my great discoveries. I do see that throughout a lot of the biblical text, there is the widow's son.
Yes, the son
So,
of the widow. Yes.
son of the widow. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very Masonic. Yes, there's a lot of that. Hiram Abif was the son of the widow.
Yes.
Yes, it's a retelling of a lot of the biblical texts from Kings and Chronicles, but in a slightly different fashion, with a different slant to it, as if they had a different tradition to the standard biblical one. Some of the names are slightly different, etc., within Masonic law, but otherwise, it's a retelling of the united monarchy of Solomon and David. So, what did I do on this? I was looking at this and thinking, how could these people have lost their most important kings? King David and King Solomon, the richest, most powerful, most influential monarchs in that era. We're talking about
Wisest.
950 BC, something of that nature.
Okay.
How on earth can those monarchs be lost from the historical record? There is no evidence for these monarchs whatsoever. Never mind the Tel Dan stela. That tells us nothing about King David. And so we have people again like Professor Finkelstein and Silverman who have done all of this archaeology across the region. And they said that Jerusalem was no more than a village in this era, 950 odd BC. So it could not have had this extravagantly wealthy monarchy of David and Solomon. It just did not exist. So the history excludes these kings. And then we've got this great long history from the Tanakh, and you think, well, how can you marry these two problems?
Mm-hmm.
One says they didn't exist, the other says they did exist. Well, we come back to our old conundrum again. Either we're looking perhaps in the wrong era, or perhaps we're looking in the wrong location.
Okay.
And that's why we can't find them. And in this case, I think we're looking in the wrong location. All of the emphasis has been on Zion, Jerusalem, and I think they should have been looking at Zoan, Tanis, which is spelt almost exactly the same in the Hebrew. So I think they've just got the wrong city. Because again, they didn't want to be associated with Egypt, just like we've seen in the the Aaron and Moses story and the Genesis story. People want to, modern Judaism and ancient Judaism want to separate themselves from Egypt. They didn't want to be associated with Egypt. And the same happened with the United Monarchy era. Later on, they became embarrassed about the fact that they were actually pharaohs of Egypt, and so they said they lived in Jerusalem instead. But
Wow.
other than that, the story is much the same. So when I started looking at this, I was quite amazed that they all had the same names. So if we go back to the ancestors of um, David and Solomon, we come across someone called Ram. This is one of the ancestors of King David. He's called Ram, or you might say Rameses.
Ramesses.
And then the next ancestor, and this is in order as they go through in the Tanakh, is Amenabdab.
Oh, Amenhotep, right?
Yeah, very close. Yes, Amenazbenebjed is the
Oh,
next pharaoh. This is we're looking at the 21st dynasty here. So we've got biblical Amenabdab and historical Amenebjed.
wow.
Is that not the same name? And then the next one in line in this dynasty is Nashon from the Bible. And in the history, we have Amenem Neshu,
Wow. That's
Nashon, Neshu. And then we have Salmon from the biblical text. And in the history, it's Siomun.
and so
Salmon.
this is still Kemet. It's another tie to Kemet.
Yeah, well, this is the 21st dynasty. Yeah. This is straight out of the history books. You can look at any Egyptian history
Wow.
book, and all of these names will drop out of the history book. So we got Salmon and Siomun.
Seaman.
It sounds exactly the same to me. And then we've got Boaz, him of the pillar of the Temple of Solomon. He was called Boaz.
Yes.
And then in history, we have Boaz Orkon,
Oh, wow.
Boaz and Boaz. And then the next one is Obed from the Bible.
Yes.
And in Egyptian history, it's Amenem Opet.
Wow, this is remarkable.
Obed Opet.
Yes.
And then we come across King David. And David, of course, doesn't not exist as a pharaoh of Egypt. But the next pharaoh of Egypt was actually Susens. If you look at it in
After Obed comes Susu,
Susens,
Susens.
Susens 1 and 2. But of course, that's not his real name. That's his Greek name. The Greeks were not very good at interpreting these names. And in the Egyptian, his name is Pasiba Kahayonit. Okay, well, that doesn't sound much like King David, of course. But you can pronounce this a different way. The Seba, Pasiba Kahayonit, the Seba means star. But you could actually replace that with Duat, which also means star. So his name would be Paduet Kahayonit. And Duad is the name of King David.
Okay,
In the
that's close.
Hebrew, he's not called David, of course, he's called Duat.
In Hebrew, it's Duat, yeah.
Yeah. And so the names do exist. Sorry, they are the same. More than that, King David was known. This is how I found this dynasty in the first place. King David was known for his star and his city,
Right, Star of David.
and the
Now,
city of David,
the word Duat means star in what language?
Egyptian,
Egyptian, okay.
same as Seba
Like when
in
you say
Egyptian.
Duat and Tur, I think that's a greeting.
It also means the underworld, yes, as well.
Oh, wow.
The Duat. Um, but Paduat Kahayonit or Pasiba Kahayonit, the name of this pharaoh, means my star rises in my city.
Oh, wow.
So this pharaoh is known for his star and his city. And
That's
King
David
David was known for his star and his
and his
city.
city. Wow, that's good.
There is a direct confluence between these two dynasties. And it goes on from there because if you look at, because what I'm saying here is that the United Monarchy was the same as the 21st dynasty in Egypt. It was the same royal family. But if that's so, then everything about this family had to be the same. So you ought to find multiple comparisons between these two dynasties. And in fact, we actually do. So the daughter of King David was known as Maccatamar.
Oh,
And the
Tamar.
daughter of, you know Maccatamar, yes?
I jumped in before you could say Tamar.
Yeah. um, and the daughter of the Pharaoh was known as Makara Mutamhat.
Wow.
Maccatamar, Makara Mutamhat.
Is this the list that you showed the other scholar, and he was like, "No, I reject
Yes.
all of this. This is very,
He just
very."
said, well, as I said, he said, yeah, just because all the names are the same doesn't mean that they are the same dynasty.
No,
Well,
there's
yeah,
too much here. There's
I
too
think
much.
we could do further research, don't you? You know, if we
Yes,
found
he
all
at
these
least should look
similarities.
into it because it's so every one is matching.
Yeah, and it goes on. So the general, the army commander for King David was called Joab. Very famous army commander. He had three army commanders that I think that controlled his army. One of them was called Joab. Now, the army commander for this pharaoh was called Joabenged.
Oh wow.
Joab and Joab. He's got exactly the same name. And the name is actually closer than that because within Kings and Chronicles, Joab was known as the commander of thousands.
And that's the same as wow.
So yeah, so he was obviously, he wasn't a centurion, he was a commander of thousands.
Wow.
That was his official title. But in Egyptian, Joab means it means 10,000. So it's exactly the same. The name sounds the same and it has the same meaning.
Same
Both of
meaning.
these army commanders were the commanders of thousands because
Wow.
that's what it means in Egyptian. Joab means 10,000. Yeah. And then, of course, we come down to what you were saying before with Hiram Abif. So the chief architect of King David was known as Hiram Abi, if you look it up in the Bible.
In the
But
Bible.
in Masonic law, he was known as Hiram Abif.
Now he was a Lebanese man.
Supposedly
Right.
Lebanese. I don't think that's actually true. I think that is actually a mistranslation of where he came from,
Hmm.
because they say he came from um, Sidon or something. I can't quite remember. I'll have to look it up. Um, but the term they are using of the city in Lebanon, which is what you're referring to, actually means rock or stone. And of course, as a chief architect, of course, he would come from the stone quarries because that's where he worked. He worked in the stone quarries. So there's a confusion here, I think, between the name of the city in Lebanon and the fact that this guy worked in the stone quarries, because his name is actually carved in the stone quarries down in Upper Egypt. So I think there's a bit of a mistranslation there. He didn't come from Lebanon. Um,
I know. I'm just
but
saying that's who you're speaking of. The one in the Bible
yes,
where it says lemon. Okay.
yeah, yeah, that he says, yeah, that he came from Lebanon. He was either the king and the architect had the same name. They were both known as Hiram.
Hmm.
But in the Bible, he's called Hiram Abi, and in Masonic law, he's called Hiram Abif. So slightly different name, but it's obviously the same person.
Definitely.
But the chief architect of this particular pharaoh we've been talking about was called Hirumasaf or Hirumatif.
That's
And
remarkable.
that's interesting because now it tells us what this name was, because of course nobody knew what Hirumabif means. But Hirum in Egyptian means of Horus. Heru is Horus,
Yeah.
the god Horus. And Hiru Atif means the son of Horus. And that, of course, is a standard name that you'll get in Egypt. Everybody was a son of one god or another, and this particular guy was the son of Horus. So
Hmm.
that makes perfect sense within Egyptian, and I
Okay.
think that's what it was talking about.
So are there two? Have you heard that the name Moses also means son, the son of, or no?
Yes, Moses means the son of. Yeah,
So there's two words that you could use that mean
yeah,
son.
and both of those words were used throughout Egypt. So Ramesses is Ra Moses, the son
Moses,
of Ra.
yes. Ra.
Our Moses is Moses, the son of the moon.
Tut
So yeah,
Moses. Yeah.
yeah. Tuth Moses is son of Thoth.
Hmm.
So yeah, Moses definitely means nothing to do with this drawing out of the water, as they say
Oh, I
in
want
the
to say
Bible.
something, Ralph. Okay, hold your thought just a little bit. I want to digress. Yes, I found that out because I'm seeing in just looking at the biblical text that your research is very in depth, but I see that there is a matrilineal connection to Kemet with the person who is Moses. In the Bible, it's showing you, if you look deeper, it just esoterically, the Moses character has a matrilineal connection with the mother and a Israelite connection with his father. So when in the text when she says, I call him Moses, she's saying my son. She's not saying because I drew him out of the water. She's saying I call him Moses because I drew him out of the water. She's talking about giving birth to him. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, quite possibly. Although this business about being on the water, of course, is a repetition of the Osirian myth, where
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Osiris was cast upon the water in a
Yes,
coffin. It's
definitely.
exactly the same. And of course, all of these princes and nobles of Egypt wanted to be linked to the gods.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you had the same birth story as Osiris, of course, it made you very important. So, yeah, people would want to copy that.
And
And
I
of
think
course, the
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think that it had to be that way. That's why each one had to have that story, right? Like you had to be. So Moses is seen as you're the Pharaoh, so you also have to have this story,
yeah,
right?
all of the pharaohs of Egypt were the son of one god or another. It gave them the power that they needed over the people. I am special. I am the son of God. Don't argue with me because God sits on my left hand side, sort of thing. Um, it gave them their power, and later on, of course, with later prophets. Uh, well, Jesus was supposed to be the Son of God in
Right.
exactly the same fashion. But when you come to later prophets like Muhammad, he denied that and said, I am just a messenger.
Mm.
But that's exactly what Akhenaten said, of course.
Oh wow.
Akhenaten wasn't claiming to be the son of God, he was the messenger of God. And so,
Okay.
again, don't mess with me because I'm talking to God all the time.
Hmm. Yeah.
I've got a direct line to God. So, I'm really, really powerful. And if you want to converse with God, you've got to come through me to do so.
They all
Again,
did
it makes them
just
very,
like
very
Moses.
powerful.
Moses did the same thing. He's like,
Yep.
I got to go talk to God, guys. Stand
Yep.
back. So yeah.
And that's where their power comes from.
So I took
Um,
you off your track, but I want to take you back to you were going through the names, and we got to a name, and you were
Yeah,
just
I
Hiram
was
Abiff.
going to have a look at these guys. Yeah, I've got them all here. Um, let's
So
do a quick screen
yeah,
share.
and I want to say thank you to the audience. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a one. I love Ralph's work. Whether or not you agree with it right away, you shouldn't agree with anything right away. You should go do your own research, but it is definitely researchable. He gives you actual historical information. So, what are we looking at now?
Yeah, now, if I'm correct, um, and of course that is open to debate, but I think I've got a lot of evidence to say it is correct. This is King Solomon.
Wow.
Because the interesting result of all of these connections is we actually have these people in the Egyptian Museum. So this dynasty was actually preserved in Tanis, in Zoan, not Zion, but in Zoan, and they were all discovered in 1939, just before the outbreak of the Second World War. And so all of their mummies were actually found. And this
Okay, and
would
this is in
be,
your book,
oh yeah.
Solomon, Pharaoh of Egypt.
Well,
So,
this is the book, yeah, Solomon, Pharaoh of Egypt.
yes, this
Um,
is his book. Okay.
the tombs of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba discovered. And the death mask here would be the death mask of King Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
And this equates very well with what it's saying, of course, within the Tanakh, because they're saying that the United Monarchy was the wealthiest, richest, most powerful, most influential monarchy of that era. Well, in the guise of these pharaohs, yes, they were. And remember, these pharaohs were not the pharaohs of Egypt, because Egypt was divided again at this time, like it was during the Hyksos era. So these pharaohs only ruled the north of Egypt. So again, there was like a civil war in Egypt between these pharaohs and the pharaohs down in, well, pseudo pharaohs. They had priest kings down in Thebes in southern Egypt. And so again, the story equates very well with the United Monarchy, because these pharaohs were the most powerful, richest, and most influential pharaohs in this era. Remember, people were coming from all over the known world to see King Solomon. Now, that wasn't happening in Judea, but it was certainly happening to these pharaohs in Tanis, where people like the Queen of Sheba would have
Right.
gone to have seen these kings.
I was going to ask you
Um,
about that. It's Queen
yeah,
of
we can
Sheba.
go. Well, we've got Queen of Sheba. She's here. But before we get to her, this is Joab. So we've got all of
Oh,
these
okay.
people, so this story sort of comes to life. If this is true, this story that had no connection to history suddenly comes to life. We have all of these characters. So this is the army commander of this king, who was called Joab, exactly the same as the army commander of King David was called Joab. And
Yes.
he's a really happy he's a happy fellow, isn't he?
Well,
For an army
not in
commander.
the biblical story, but he also is slain. He's I think he's slain by the command of Solomon in the Bible.
No, that was the son of King David was slain by Joab. So
Okay, but
Joab
then
killed.
doesn't Solomon could direct them to have Joab's killed?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, yes. When he wanted to
The
marry Bathsheba.
the
No, again, that
Shulamite,
was that was
the
that was
Shulamite.
King David. That was King
Well,
David.
something like that. But what I'm saying
Yeah.
is, this is actually his general in
Yes.
in Kemetic history.
Yeah, that was King David who wanted to kill his son because his son started a civil war. Basically, he
You're
wanted to
talking about
take the throne.
Absalom. Absalom.
Absalom. Yeah. And so yeah, King David wanted him done away with. And then
Do
there was
you have a
another story.
representation for Absalom that you can correlate in the Egyptian line or Kemetic?
Um, I'm trying to remember if I actually found this in the historical record. There were quite a lot of deaths. Oh yes, the other death that you were talking about probably was correct. Was King Solomon wanted to marry Bathsheba and so put her husband into the front line of the army so he would be killed.
Oh, you're talking about the
No,
David. David wanted
that
to
was
marry.
David. Sorry, that
Yeah.
was King David again. Yes, so there were two major killings by King David.
But let me ask you, Ralph, in Kemet, in the actual historical record, are Solomon and David different, or are they just one same king?
No, I think they are different. Solomon was the son of Bathsheba, and then we can come on to Bathsheba because I found her in the historical record as well. Because now this is difficult to explain. Bathsheba means the daughter of Sheba.
Yes. Yes, it
Now,
does.
remember, in my identification, the actual name of the pharaoh was Pa-sheba Kahayanet.
Mm,
So this king was actually called Sheba, which means star. It's either Seba or Sheba, which means star in the Egyptian.
okay.
So Bathsheba means the daughter of Sheba,
Daughter of Sheba,
the
yes.
daughter of this king. And this is part of the reason why a lot of this history is messed up, because they didn't want to admit that Bathsheba was the daughter of King David. Because Bathsheba married King David.
Oh, which is
So,
wow.
well, it's not such a wow in Egyptian terms
No, I was
because
going to say it's
all,
very comedic, though. They did marry there.
yeah,
There was some
precisely.
incest going on.
That was de rigueur in those eras. Akhenaten
Mm.
married three of his daughters.
And that could be why also in the story there's this taboo background on it. Like, oh, Uriah's wife, there's adultery. Maybe they said, let's swap out adultery for incest. The adultery is more acceptable.
Yes, yes. Um, I think this is what they were trying to cover up. So Bathsheba was the daughter of Sheba, which is the Egyptian name for King David. And later on, she marries because King David marries Bathsheba. But when she marries Bathsheba, she changes her title because she's no longer Bath, she is Malkasheba.
Mm.
She is the queen of Sheba
Uh-oh. Okay, I
because
get
she
it.
married the king. So now the daughter of Sheba now becomes the queen of Sheba because she married her father, who was called Sheba.
And then she marries her son.
Yeah, later on, yes.
That's
But
very, very close to the way the stories of like Heru Horus, um, Isis, Aset, and Osiris, Asar, how she essentially becomes the wife. You know what? I have a whole lesson on this. How the mother in all of these spiritual stories is first the wife to the father and then becomes the wife to the son.
mm,
Just like Mary Magdalene and Jesus, but Mary, the mother, and Jesus. It's very interesting.
I think this happened quite a lot. It happened to the Queen Theomusa Orania as well. She married her son. So
Mm.
this happened quite a lot.
Semiramis.
Say again?
Semiramis.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, if I remember correctly. So
Um,
yeah, this was quite common
yeah,
because they wanted to keep the
the blood.
bloodline in the
Oh,
family, and they
wow.
wanted to keep the monarchy within the family because this was their power base. They didn't want to marry outside the family because that would spread the power base far and wide into different families. So, but what this is saying is that the Queen of Sheba was Bathsheba, was the daughter of King David, the daughter of Sheba. But we have this daughter, and here she is.
Wow.
This is Makara Mutemhat.
Oh, wow. What now? Where is this found in the again in
Uh,
Kemet Museum or in
yeah,
London?
this is in the Cairo Museum.
Okay,
Um,
Cairo.
this was in the old museum. They've just moved to the new museum now. And this is the daughter of that king, King Sheba, King Pasiba Kahayanet. And this is his daughter, and she has the same name as the daughter of King David, who is otherwise known as Makara Mutemhat.
Oh, wow.
But her nickname, because she married the king, was Malkasheba, the Queen of Sheba. And here she is in Avaris or
Hmm.
Pyramisi. This is an enormous statue. So this is 2 meters. That's 2 meters long, just the top of this statue. So this is an enormous statue of Makara Mutemhat.
No,
So
is
she
this?
was
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
She was. I was just going to say she was very, very famous, obviously, in this era.
And this is in Karnak, you said?
No, this is in Pyramisi,
Oh, Pyramisi, yeah, in Avarice.
which is now it's just to the north of Zagazig. So this is in Zagazig, which is in the Nile Delta. Not many people go to Zagazig, but anyway, it's a big archaeological site there with all of these ruins there. And this was one of the capital cities of the Hyksos, and then later on it became one of the capital cities of the 21st dynasty when they took over the Nile Delta. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things, and I liked this one. This is a Victorian 19th century painting of King David. And I just
Okay.
liked the way that this Victorian artist had drawn him as an Egyptian pharaoh, which I thought was very apt.
Oh, so where is this? Is this from, this is this is European from the Renaissance?
Yeah,
Or you
yeah,
said
this is
19th century?
19th
Okay.
century, so this is
Oh, a
quite
little
recent.
later.
But
Oh, okay.
I thought it interesting that the artist was sufficiently knowledgeable to draw King David as an Egyptian pharaoh.
Interesting.
Yeah, he got that right, I think.
So,
And
what do you think about when you say Egyptian pharaoh? Is there any other are there any other scholars who are like, yes, I agree, Ralph. My research has shown this as well.
no, we get the same result as Professor Finkelstein, who's famously said, just because all the names are the same doesn't mean that the two monarchies are the same. There is a rejection of this because it has political implications, the same as we were
Of course.
talking about
Right.
with the Exodus. Well, this has political implications as well, because if Professor Finkelstein agreed with me, he would be saying that the Israelite homeland is the Nile Delta.
Is the Nile Delta. Right. Right.
So all of the Israelites, the whole of Israel, should be in the Nile Delta.
And they can't do that. I
They
want to
can't do.
I want to point something out about religion. See, it's not about truth. You have to do your own seeking for the truth. The truth is separate from the politics, because you see how they don't want you to know the truth because they will lose the political control. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
This is a political hot potato, and they cannot mention this and change the history they've crafted over the last 500 years or whatever, because it's politically unacceptable. Nobody wants to move Israel into the Nile Delta, especially not the Egyptians, of course. So they don't want to admit that Israel had anything to do with Egypt.
exactly.
So yeah, nobody can admit this. Nobody can admit it at all.
And they've
Because
also
this,
programmed so many bulldogs in their religion. You tell this to the typical mainstream Abrahamic Christian or Jew or even these Israelites, they go crazy. So anyway, go.
even though they are looking for a very powerful and influential monarchy
Yeah,
to be the united monarchy,
and then you
which
hand
they
it to
cannot
them, and
find.
they don't want it.
No, which they cannot find in Judea. But here is this monarchy here in the Nile Delta, and they will reject it because they can't accept it.
Yes, it
It's
is.
it's a it's an odd situation. You've got to be fairly broad-minded in order to see. You've either got to be broad-minded or you've got to be completely naive. And by naive, I mean someone who knows nothing about this story. So if you drag I don't know, maybe a Japanese person or something who knows nothing about Judaism, nothing
Right.
about the history of Egypt, and you say, right, these are all these connections between these two monarchies. Do you think they're the same?
They say yes, of
Of course
course.
they would say yes. Yeah,
I mean,
because
look
they
at the
have no.
comments.
Yeah, this mummy. This is King David.
Oh wow! Now let's tell us what the background. Where is this located?
So this is the sarcophagus of the person I've been talking about, Pasiba Kahayanet. Um, and this would be King David. Now this is fantastic because this is solid silver. It's one
Where is
of
this
only two.
sarcophagus? What museum?
This is in the Cairo Museum again.
Okay, great.
And
Thank you.
funnily enough, in the Cairo Museum, in the old museum, they were on the same um, corridor as Tutankhamun.
Oh wow.
So down one end of the corridor, you would find, 500 people down that end of the corridor, all trying to queue up and get into the rooms of Tutankhamun.
Mm.
Down the other end of the corridor, which is where I was, there was nobody there.
Oh
I
wow.
was the only person there because nobody is interested in this dynasty. And yet the gold and the silver ware that they had there are the equivalent, the equal of anything in the Tutankhamun section. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic, some of the workmanship they've got here. And they've made this sarcophagus of solid silver. And so bad was this when I first went there. This was back in the early 2000s. There were no lights down my end of the
Oh
corridor.
wow.
There was
Not
simply no
even any
lights.
lights. They had the
No
lights
lights at
out.
all. So I couldn't take any photos. And of course I needed some photos for my book. So this was getting a bit desperate. So I managed to get hold of one of the curators and said, look, can we have some lights? They couldn't get the lights to work. So finally they came out with this wandering lamp, one of those lamps you plug into a
Oh
plug and
wow.
then wander off down the corridor. And so I had this guy holding this wandering lamp was the only way I could get some light
Oh,
onto
that
these
is great
artifacts.
story because this is a
Yeah.
really wonderful. This is
And
solid silver, right?
yeah, solid silver with obviously a gold band on his head.
Yes. Wow.
But this is Pasiba Kahayanet or Paduat Kahayanet. This is King David. And so again, this is bringing the whole of this story to life because we have all of their tombs, their sarcophagi, their mummies. Well, the mummies have, because they're in the north of Egypt, most of them have decayed, so you can't see the people as such. But everything else, yeah, is still there. So I found that rather exciting. And also, you then find the temple. So this is the Temple of Jerusalem. Well, not the Temple of Jerusalem, of course. This is the Temple of Tanis, the small Temple of Tanis.
Okay.
Um, and of course, it has very much the same name as the Temple of Jerusalem. The Temple of Jerusalem is known as the Haikal Yahweh, the Temple of Yahweh. This one is called the Hetkar Patar. Haikal, Hetkar.
Headcount.
The similarity between these two languages is very close. One of the other things I've said about this era, which again goes down like a bit of a lead balloon in some circles, is that Hebrew is a daughter language of Egyptian.
Oh
That's
yeah.
why there are so many similarities between these two languages, because, well, it's fairly obvious, really, isn't it? Where did these people live? They lived in Egypt.
Yeah, they lived
So,
there.
what language would they have spoken?
They
Egyptian.
spoke Kemet, or
Um,
Kemetic language. Metanetter.
yeah.
Well, what's the okay? When I hear metanetter, I know that means word of God. Um, I there's a teacher. We have a couple of teachers who teach the metanetter. They study it. They do the Egyptology. One person had said that everyone it wasn't like an exclusive language, the metanetter, everyone spoke it. And then I heard other accounts where it says it was an exclusive language, it was like a only elite people could read. What is your research showing you on that? I just wanted to.
Well, of course, yes. Like all ancient civilizations, only the elite could read because that was very difficult. Most people didn't go to school. So only the priesthood, the scribes, and the pharaoh would be able to read. But everyone else could speak the language, of course, because speaking a language, anyone can pick up a language. That's, very simple. But reading in hieroglyphs is a very difficult topic. It's not a very easy language to understand. You would have to be educated in that particular language for a number of years in order to be able to understand it.
Hmm.
But luckily we can, so we get books like this. This is the Egyptian Dictionary, which comes in
Okay.
2 volumes.
We're
So
familiar with Wallace Budge.
yeah, it's
Yes.
actually very good. I find it better than the modern ones actually because it's got a very good index in the back of it, so you can look up these words. But when you go through it, you will find that word after word after word actually is present in the Hebrew.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I've got a book somewhere. I'm not sure if I've got it just easily there somewhere, which is no, I can't see it there. Hebrew words in Egyptian. Um, Hebrew loan words in Egyptian. Words that the Hebrews gave to the Egyptians. And this is a proper academic book. And I'm thinking, well, that's a stupid title. Who was the dominant society here? The Israelites or the Egyptians?
The
Of course, it's
Egyptians.
going to be Egyptian loan words in Hebrew, not the other way around. It will be
Right.
the Hyksos Israelites adopting the Egyptian language. And that's why you get all these similarities. I've got a dictionary of about 400 words that are the same between Egyptian and Hebrew. So there are numerous similarities. A lot of the words are very similar or the same. And that's because these people spoke Egyptian. Because remember, Joseph was the prime minister of Egypt.
He
You,
was. He was what is it called? The vizier?
yeah, the vizier, second only to Pharaoh. You don't
Yeah.
become prime minister of Egypt if you cannot speak Egyptian.
And Ralph, I also showed in my research, I found out in my research and showed in my debate that the vizier was often also one of the high priests. He was a high
Yes.
priest.
Well, that's why he had the coat of many colors, of course. He would
Oh,
have
tell
been
us
a
about that. Tell us.
well, in the biblical story, it says that Joseph had a coat of many colors. That's one of his attributes that everybody knows him by. But the coat of many colors was
The
most
leopard?
probably a priest's cloak. So yes, it's identifying him as a high priest. And remember, he married the high priest's daughter.
Yes, he did. He sure did.
So it's highly likely that he was a high priest of Heliopolis.
You told me
Um,
his name before. I want to hear you say it again. I can't remember. In the
yes. Oh, I might have to look that up because I can't remember.
right.
Um,
Because I
let
had
me.
asked you if he was Imhotep.
Yes. Well, he's very close to that.
So while you
Let me.
check on that, I wanted to know we've been going for you are. I'm bringing you back to the cam up, and we're not done. Don't try to run away. But I want to ask you. People have been saying they want to come in and ask some questions. They're going to be very respectful. We have some regulars who really want to pick your brain. Just ask a couple questions. Is it all right if I drop the link and they come in and talk to you?
Sure, no problem at all. I can answer any questions. So yes, here we. I think we discussed this a little bit before in one of our talks, but yeah, these people had different names, of course, in the Egyptian.
Right.
So the names we know them by are the sort of Judaic equivalents. So Joseph was known as Petaseph.
Petaseph.
Petaseph. Now I can explain that because, and this comes from Manetho, who's the Egyptian historian from 3rd century BC. So this is going back quite a way.
And yes,
And we know this because he explains the next one in more detail. So Moses was called Osaseph.
Osaseph.
And
Oh yes, I've heard of
Osaseph,
that. I've heard of
yeah,
that.
it comes from Osiris. Osar is from Osiris. And Seth is the same as we were using for Hiram Abif. The Seth name means son of.
Son, another son of, like
Another
Joseph.
son of, because they all had to be the son of somebody.
Joseph.
So yeah, Joseph, of course. They've still got the Egyptian on the end of
They do.
Joseph.
Yes.
So Yo is Yahweh, of course.
Yes.
Seth means son of, so he's the son of Yahweh. It's a
Son of
typical
Yahweh.
Egyptian name.
Yes.
So Osar Seth for
Also,
Moses means the son of Osiris. Again, a standard Egyptian name. So Ptah Seth, when we come to Ptah, it's obviously Ptah,
Ptah, yes, yes.
who is the god of masons. So Ptah Seth means the son of Ptah, the god of masons, of Freemasonry. And of course, that ties in very well. And
The architect, Joseph.
because he's an architect, of course, yes.
Yeah.
And it also ties in well with the New Testament, where the New Testament Joseph was supposed to be a carpenter or an
Yes.
architect.
There you go.
It ties in very well. So I think these names are correct.
Wow. You're a high level esoteric code breaker. I like that.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That's what one thing I really love is like going and seeing you unravel everything. But go ahead. Sorry.
Well, it also proves that the Old Testament is correct in a lot of the things it says, because if we look up Joseph's name in the Old Testament, his Egyptian name, because it gives both names, he's called Joseph, and then it gives his Egyptian name, which was Zapnath Paneah.
Zapnath Paneah. That's what you got it.
Yeah,
but that Seth is Seth. That Zaph would be Seth as well, right?
Well, Nath is Neith.
Neith.
And Zaphnath can mean, well, it's Zaph is the same as Seth, of course.
Yes.
So we're talking about Sephnath, the son of Neith. Now that's interesting because Neith was the wife of Ptah. So it makes perfect sense that Joseph was the son of Ptah and the son of Neith, because they were man and wife gods, you know. So of course he was the son of both of these gods. So it actually makes perfect sense, which indicates that the biblical account is actually correct. Yes. And so therefore we can trust a lot of the information that it's giving, because it's giving correct information. So yeah, I found that very interesting, that they got both of the correct gods for Joseph. And I was wondering what else we've got here. Yeah, lots of good information in these books that you won't find elsewhere. And I think that's the rest of my pictures all done. Oh, well, while we're here, we might as well just talk about this. This is the first degree tracing board from the Freemasonry.
Yes.
When you go through the first degree, this is the tracing board, and all of these tracing boards have esoteric meaning, regards Egypt, of course. And these pillars are not the pillars of the Temple of Solomon, which were called Yakin and Boaz.
Yakin and Boaz.
These are S, W, and B, which is strength, wisdom, and beauty. But they are identified with the sun and the moon. And we've got two larger pillars and one smaller pillar behind. So what does this represent? Well, this comes straight out of Egypt. This is the Giza Plateau.
Oh, wow.
With the three pyramids on the Giza Plateau, with one of them being very big, this one very slightly smaller, and then the little one behind. This is an indication of the Giza Plateau. And of course, the Giza Plateau did have this black basalt pavement on the east side of the Great Pyramid. So that's what's being indicated with the checkerboard down below. And this is the stairway to heaven. Normally 7 steps. They've got 14 here, I think. But this is the stairway to heaven, indicating that you could climb up the pyramids. Yeah.
And Jacob's ladder that's also
This is
referenced.
Jacob's ladder. But this is also Moses' ladder because he climbed up Mount Sinai.
Yes, he did. Yes.
And that's exactly what you could do at Giza. You could actually climb up the side of the pyramids because there were steps in the side of the pyramid. You could climb up to the top.
And let me ask you, Ralph, excuse me, is that why we see ridges on the larger one, the grooves in the larger column?
This one is fluted.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know why that would be fluted and the others not.
Does the larger one have the steps?
Yes, it's the larger one has the steps. Yeah,
so
it's
possibly
the Great Pyramid
that could
has
be
the
a representation of the steps.
Yeah, and we've got the 3 different capitals on the top. We've got the Corinthian, the Doric, and the other one, which I forget its name of. These are sort of like central elements of masonry that you've got these 3 different types of
designs.
Yeah, on the top of the pillars, the capitals on the pillars. So there's a lot of esoteric symbolism
Let me ask masonry. You, what about the key hanging? And if you're coming in, please turn on your camera if you'd like to come in. What about the key hanging from the?
It's the key to the kingdom of heaven.
I see. Okay.
But you know, if you were climbing up the pyramid and you wanted to go in the door to the pyramid, because the front door to the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, was always open. We know that because Strabo describes it, and Strabo was 2nd century BC or something, and he actually describes the entrance to the pyramid. But yeah, there might have been as it were, a key to get in to the pyramid. I think this is what they're trying to portray here. Yes, it's all full of, and this is the sarcophagus of Hiram Abiff. So this is from the 3rd degree. So this is the guy.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
No, I want you, and I know everybody wants to hear this because they're like on the edge of their seat. They're like, I knew there was some masonry involved, some Freemasonry involved. But will you please segue into the story of Jesus with the particular story of Hiram Abiff, and just go ahead and explain what you were going to explain? But can you go into the story of Jesus? Because there is a connection, right?
Yes, there is a connection. Yes. So this comes from the 3rd degree of Freemasonry. So you've got 3 main degrees of Freemasonry, and you go through these ceremonies. And when you go through the ceremony, this is the tracing board that's put on the floor in the center of lodge. And they all have this symbolism. This is the symbolism of the building of the Temple of Solomon, because that's what Freemasonry is all about, is about the building of the Temple of Solomon by Hiram Abiff, who was the chief architect of King David. But he was killed. And so he was killed and put in a rough grave and then resurrected from the dead on the third day. So that's why we've got this sprig of acacia at the top, because that was what marked his grave. That's how they found his grave, with this sprig of acacia. And this is his sarcophagus, or coffin, you might say, with the skull and crossbones. So, when the pirates started going across the high seas with the skull and crossbones, a lot of people say it came from Freemasonry, that some of these people, these privateers, were Freemasons. These texts this is a very simple code within Freemasonry, these texts, and it's just marking him as being the son of a widow. And these are all just accoutrements of Freemasonry. So we've got the level. yeah, the yes, the old gavel, and at the top we've got the compass and whatever. So yeah, these are um, the standard tracing boards you get within Freemasonry. How's this linked to? Oh, while we're here, again we can see the links to the United Monarchy. This is Grand Lodge in London.
Mm.
So this is quite a modern building. It says 1717 on the front. That was the founding of Grand Lodge, but this building wasn't built until the 1930s. It's in central London in Queen Street. And it's a delightful temple, and it has some wonderful mosaics. And of course, these mosaics portray the United Monarchy from the Bible. So here we have an image of Solomon, King Solomon, and Hiram Abif, his chief architect, and the two pillars of Yakin and Boaz. And then we've got the Ark of the Covenant, of course. Here we've got the 7 steps of Jacob's ladder,
Mm.
going up to the Yod, and the Yod is a Hebrew symbol of God. So that is the God symbol, is the Yod. So yeah, and this is all on the top. This is a huge, great frieze that runs around the top of the temple. It's quite impressive, actually. And then on the other side, we've got this, which is St. George and the Dragon. And again, we've got the 2 pillars of Yakin and Boaz. And on top of the pillars of Yakin and Boaz, which used to stand at the front of the Temple of Solomon, we have the sphere of the earth, which is this one, I think, and the sphere of the cosmos.
Oh, wow.
The idea being that even back in this early era, they knew that, the earth was a sphere and the cosmos could be viewed as a sphere around the earth, etc., etc. That they understood a lot of cosmology within early Judaism. And obviously we've got the Star of David and things of that nature. So yeah, it's a very impressive temple, and you can actually go round it. So you can actually make a booking and be shown around. I think it's only at the weekends, I'm not sure, but anyway, you can make a booking and go to see this temple, and it's quite interesting if you happen to be there. And following on the Egyptian theme, this is the Philadelphia Lodge. So this is the Freemasonic Lodge in Philadelphia. And as you can see, it's 100% Egyptian.
Right.
Because a lot of people within Freemasonry understand that this history came out of Egypt, which you wouldn't guess immediately because it's talking about the building of the Temple of Solomon, which is supposed to be obviously in Jerusalem. So you wouldn't immediately sort of connect it to Egypt. But of course, many lodges do connect it straight up to Egypt because the Temple of Solomon was actually in Egypt. It was in Tanis. And so they understand the Egyptian connections, and that's why you get these Egyptian lodges, because that's where these people came from. They came out of Egypt. So
Wow.
yeah, I hope people found that sort of interesting. I shall come
Very
out of
interesting.
stop screen share. There we go. We're back again. Hello.
That was really wonderful information. I wanted to ask you some. I have to bring you back and just do a whole, just exclusive on just Freemasonry, the Freemasons that, which you are a Freemason, correct?
Yes, yes.
And let me just touch on that a little bit. Um, where do we begin? Okay, I don't want to laugh. Everybody, when you hear Freeman, even though there's thousands and thousands of Freemasons worldwide, every time someone says they're a Freemason, they're like, most people who call themselves woke are like, oh, he's worshiping the devil. He's part of the Illuminati. Talk to us about, is it because all the secrets? Is that why?
Slightly because of the secrets, but mainly because the Catholic Church does not like Freemasonry. And so the Catholic Church likes to demonize Freemasonry,
Right.
just as they tried to demonize the Knights Templar, because they are on opposing sides of the theological debate, you might say. Are you still there? Oh, you are. Good.
Oh, I am sorry.
Because when we go back to the Knights Templar held secrets about the New Testament, about Jesus. I'm sure that they knew lots about what I write in my book, Jesus, King of Edessa.
Yes.
Because when the Crusades went out to the Near East in 1096 on the First Crusade, they didn't go to Jerusalem initially. They went to Edessa. So the first city they liberated from Muslim control in that era was Edessa. Why was that? Well, because they probably knew that if you wanted any secrets about the New Testament, about the Gospel era, you would find them in Edessa, not in Jerusalem. And that's why they went to Edessa. So I think they had secrets that the Catholic Church didn't want you to know about.
Right.
Remember, Edessa had been hidden behind, the Iron Curtain of Islam for like since the 7th century, so about 500 years. And so that part of the world could hold different traditions, different histories, different secrets to what they had in Rome, because they had no access to that part of the world. And so suddenly all of these new information came flooding back to the West, and that information was held by the Knights Templar. And when we come to the Freemasons, well, they are descendants effectively of the Knights Templar.
Right.
And so the Catholic Church has been equally fearful of Freemasonry as it was of the Knights
The night.
Templar. And so
Yes.
they try and demonize it. Whereas in effect, it was the Illuminati, in the proper sense of the word, meaning the illuminated ones, the people
Right.
who understood,
The enlightened.
who ushered in the Renaissance and the Age of Reason
Yes.
against the Catholic Church. This is why the Catholic Church doesn't like Freemasonry. So when we came to the Reformation, which is the most important era for Europe, it is
Which
what made...
which is contemporaneous with Renaissance.
Yes, it was part of the Renaissance, because the
Right.
Renaissance would not have been able to have evolved were it not for the Reformation.
Reformation.
So
Yeah.
the Reformation started with Martin Luther,
Yes.
the original Martin Luther,
Mm-hmm.
who opposed the Catholic Church because he said the Catholic Church was getting corrupt.
Right. With
And so
indulgences.
with the indulgences, yes, you know all about them. Yes, they
I
were.
know all
They
about
were.
it.
Yeah.
But no, keep
They were.
going. I love it. I love it. Keep going.
They were absolving sin for cash. And that's how the Catholic Church was growing so rich. And of course, Martin Luther said, this is corruption. You're not allowed to do this. And that started the Reformation movement, which spread all across Northern Europe, not across the south, of course. So Spain and Italy, of course, remained Catholic, as did most of France. But all of the north became Protestant. They were protesting against the Catholic Church. And they formed their own church, which, is the Protestant church. It's like the Church of England. And the difference being that the Protestant churches allowed much more freedom. And one of the great freedoms they allowed was freedom of association, freedom of worship, and freedom of science. Because under the Catholic Church, you were highly restricted on what you could go and actually research as a scientist. Under the Protestant churches, the Reformation churches, they thought completely the opposite. They had this view that, well, if the universe and the cosmos is the workings of God, then surely God would want you to explore it
Right.
and find out how God's machinery actually worked. That's called science. And that's why we had science in the North, whereas the Catholics down in the South never did. And it was on the back of that Reformation and the Age of Reason, and as you say, the Renaissance, that we got the Industrial Revolution. The
Mm,
Industrial Revolution could not have happened were it not for Martin Luther and his Reformation. And so all of the machinery, everything you see around you, all of the technology that we have, including this internet that we are talking over,
hmm.
was due to the Reformation and the Age
Reformation.
of Reason
And the
and
Renaissance too. We can't leave.
and
We
the
have to put them
Renaissance. Yeah.
together. Right. And then the
But
ages. Don't forget the
all,
scientific age. The scientific era came out of the
yes,
industrial.
absolutely,
I
it
like
was
to jump
all
in
on the
and let
back of
you
that.
know that I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. But all of that was aided by Freemasonry.
Yes.
Because Freemasonry at that time was operating behind the scenes, because, like most things, it could not come out of the closet because it was opposed by the Catholic Church so much. And it wasn't until that the Renaissance became established that they finally came out in 1717 with the founding of Grand Lodge. Now, that wouldn't have been able to happen without the Protestant Revolution and Reformation. Um, and it was aided and abetted by the Freemasons themselves, because they were known as the illuminated ones, the people who understood. Um, and that's why when we had the we ended up with William III, who was a Dutch king, who came to England to become King of England, because he was Protestant, because we were trying to get rid of our Catholic king, the Jameses and the Charleses. And if you read it in the most of the history books, it says something like the leading lights of London invited the Dutch king to become the King of England. And by you can hear the terminology, the leading lights, the illuminated ones, the Illuminati,
Yeah.
invited the King of Holland to become the King of England because he was a Protestant. And so, yeah, the Freemasons were at the center of this Reformation and the Age of Reason, because they were non-religious in many respects. You're supposed to be religious to be a Freemason. You're supposed to believe in a supreme deity,
Mhm.
but the type of religion you have is irrelevant. You can be, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Christian, um, Jewish, or whatever, and you can still join, because it is a a very open society.
Mm.
And that is why Freemasonry was very influential during this early eras of the Reformation.
But
It's
may
not
I
so
jump in and
influential
ask a question?
now. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I want to ask you a question about that though. Isn't it true that even though yes, it doesn't matter what religion you, what faith you hold, you just need to have a faith in a higher power. Wouldn't those who are more, um, how do you say, informed on the level that you are about the ancient writing, like the Bible and Kemet, those are the ones who progress higher in rank, though you're not really going to get as high in rank if you're not at least informed about Hiram Abiff, Solomon, right? You have to know
Yeah,
about
it
that.
all comes out of Judaic teaching, yes. But I mean,
Yeah.
if you happen to be a Muslim, then most of the Quran comes out of Judaic teachings anyway. So it's
Yes.
part of the same tradition.
True.
So there's no problem with uh, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam in joining Freemasonry. It's slightly more difficult, I suppose, if you are Japanese or something, but there were lodges established over in Japan and many places that didn't have this Judaic tradition, but nevertheless they subscribed to this Judaic tradition because it was the tradition of Freemasonry. There were lodges all across Egypt and the Near East, of course, in days gone by. When Britain was influential in these regions, there were Masonic lodges all across the Near East. It was quite influential.
Why do we
It's
hear
not so
about the
influential
Scottish?
now because
Sorry,
people
I'm
no
sorry.
longer. Sorry.
No, no, I'm
Um,
trying to pick your brain as much as possible before we let you go. I know you're
yes.
flowing, but I want to ask you specific questions. So I think there's also delay. So they always say, you interrupt the guest. We're old friends, everybody. So just chill out. So anyway, I want to ask you, what about the Scottish Rite? Is that the first official, so to say, free, because the Freemasons were actually so-called construction workers and architects. But then is the story true where the Knights Templar, they escaped the persecution and they were being executed, and they went to Scotland? And is there truth to that, where they started the first lodge with the Freemasons when they joined together the Scottish Rite with the Scottish Rite?
Yes, you'll find the Templar lodges are all up in Scotland. So yes, it was very prevalent in Scotland because the Knights Templar, when they were destroyed in 1307, a lot of them fled to Scotland. And they did so because Scotland at the time was excommunicated. So the Templars were being threatened by the Catholic Church. One of the few places where the Catholic Church could not reach was Scotland, because they had already been excommunicated. So yeah, of course, a lot of them went to Scotland, which is why Masonry is so prevalent in Scotland. And when we were staying up at Roslin Abbey, Roslin Church, we were staying in the Roslin Castle, which is next door to it. And so we had rooms there. We were living there for the weekend. And I was amazed to see that they had the scroll of the Scottish lodges, the first scroll. So this is going back to the 17th century, was sitting on the floor of the living room in this castle. And it was a scroll, but this was a scroll that was I don't know, it was like 18 inches, nearly 2 foot in diameter, and it was on a turntable sort of device, so you could actually pull it out across the floor all the way to the other side of the room and read all of the names of the lodges of Scotland. So every lodge in the whole of Scotland had signed this scroll.
Oh, wow.
And it started not with Lodge 1, it started with Lodge 0, which I think was Kilwinning at the time. And it was every Freemason in the whole of Scotland had signed this scroll. This is back in the
That's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's probably early 18th century, not 17th. But anyway, it goes back a long, long way. So yes, it was very prevalent in Scotland because of the influence of the Knights Templar, which shows how intimately involved the Knights Templar were with Masonic history. A lot of it has sort of faded now in Britain. It's still strong in America, Masonry, but not so much in Britain, because we're no longer a religious nation. America is. You obviously get a lot of very religious people in America. We don't have that in Britain. Most people in Britain are irreligious, apart from the Muslims, of course. But most people don't go to church anymore. And so we've lost this idea of going to a service, because effectively, going to lodge is the same as going to church. You go to church on Sunday and you go through the church ritual on the Sunday, and then you go to lodge maybe on the Tuesday or Wednesday, and you go through lodge ritual on the Tuesday or Wednesday. And it's like a parallel sort of church society. That's how it feels when you go to lodge. But of course, nobody goes to church anymore. So why would you want to go to lodge anymore? So we've sort of
Mm,
lost that connection between religion and Freemasonry. So we don't tend to go to Freemasonry anymore. The lodges are just getting older and older and older,
mm.
as people get older. So I think the average age in my lodge I used to go to was, I think the average age was about 80 years old or something.
Oh, wow.
It's
Wow.
a dying fraternity, really.
Yes, and it's because people are trying, as we start to uncover the esoteric and get the truth, people are rejecting ritual. They're rejecting such things because they see it as so they have a disdain for it because they tie it into the lies that they've been taught.
Well, yes, but also you don't need to go to lodge to find out what lodge is about. At one time, you really had to go to lodge and go through the 3 degrees. Otherwise, you had no idea what Freemasonry is about. But nowadays, of course, a lot of it is just on the internet. So if you want to know the secrets of Masonry, you don't really need to join a lodge anymore. And so a lot of people don't. They're doing their research on the internet. They're not actually going to lodge to get, secrets of the ancient churches. Now it's all available on the internet. Now you can read my books, and it's all been distilled into my
Right.
books.
Right. And your books are
Um,
just awesome.
yeah.
They're amazing.
So the world is changing, and I don't know if in England whether Freemasonry will survive. It'll survive for a bit longer in America, of course, because America is still a religious country. But it's on shaky ground in Britain, that's for sure.
Yeah, what's happening is too, it's going to always be there. It's just be going. What's happening is there was I don't want to say an influx, but it's an influx into mainstream population. However, it used to be very exclusive and locked away from the people. We started to get more information, so there was an influx of the information about these secret lodges. But now, seems like it's going back into the exclusivity for those elitists, or those who are privy to those secrets, like you. I've been trying to get some of these secrets out of you. No, we've got a lot of secrets out of you today, and the thing about you is you share what is secret. You're sharing with us what you
Yes.
discovered that's been secret for so long. So we appreciate that.
A lot of this is not even known within Masonic lodges. A lot of this information I've been teasing
Mm,
out about, the United Monarchy in Tanis, that is not known within Freemasonry. This is
wow.
all new knowledge. That link between the Exodus and the Hyksos Exodus, that is not taught in lodge. That's all new information. So a
Mm,
lot of this, that's why I became a Masonic instructor, because a lot of this information is actually not known within lodge. So that's interesting that Freemasonry didn't understand its full history, um, and still doesn't in many respects.
hmm. Would
Um,
you say the New Testament? Okay, the Knights Templar. I forgot to. I mean, not to cut you off, but I got to guide you over here back to where my wheels are turning. Okay, the Knights Templar, for anyone who doesn't know, they were actually hired by the Catholic Church at first to do the conquest, right?
well, they were formed after the conquest had actually succeeded. So after
Okay,
Jerusalem had been taken over by the Crusaders, they were formed supposedly to protect pilgrims going to
right,
Jerusalem.
right.
But it was quite obvious from the fact that they were encamped on Temple Mount, where the big mosque is now. That's where they were encamped, the Al Aqsa Mosque. It's quite obvious that they were actually on the Temple Mount because they were looking for secrets. Because if
Yes.
if you, if you were going to find any secrets in Jerusalem, it was probably going to be on the Temple Mount. And so that's what they were doing. And of course, the first crusade, as I said previously, didn't go to Jerusalem initially. It it went to Edessa. And
Odessa.
again, I think the reason is because they understood that Edessa was central to the gospel story. We can go through that later with my book, Jesus, the King of Edessa.
I got to do that.
Um, yeah, it seems it's funny how this arrives. You know, I did this book, Jesus, the King of Edessa, all of this research, 550 pages, and
Wow.
only after I'd published the book did I find that the Crusaders went to Edessa.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, oh, well, now we know why they went to Edessa. You know, there are secrets to be had in Edessa. If
You
you're
need a new
looking for any,
edition. You need a second edition of a book. Bring
oh,
it
well, I
out.
did. The second edition was the Grail cipher, which was
Mm.
my exploration of Arthurian legend, because that was connected with the Crusader story as well.
Oh, wow.
Because, well, because Arthurian
That
legend
makes
only
sense.
appeared.
Knights of
Sorry?
the Round Table.
Yeah, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Arthurian legend only appears after the First Crusade. In fact, 30 years after the First Crusade, about 5 years, I think, after the Knights Templar were founded, suddenly we get Arthurian legend.
Wow.
And there is a connection there. I'm sure there is a connection because there are so many similarities. We can do a talk on that as well. I think a lot of this information for Arthurian legend came back from the Crusades, came back from Edessa. So, yeah, there's another story. Um, so you can see that these Templars had a lot of inside information, and that made them very dangerous to the Catholic Church. That's the last thing the Catholic Church is wanting you to know is, you know, the true genealogy of Jesus, the true history of Jesus,
Mm.
the fact that he was a real king and not just a pretend king, all of this sort of information. If they held all of that information in the Middle Ages, that made them very dangerous. That made them very powerful. And that's why people joined, you know, the Knights Templar, because they wanted to be a part of these mysteries. Um, because, you know, the Catholic Church was all powerful in those days,
Yeah.
you know. Never mind Big Brother, you know, Big Brother was already there. It was called the Catholic Church. You couldn't do anything
Yes.
without the Catholic Church knowing about it. You know, that's
Oh,
why
yeah.
they have confessions, you know.
Oh, yeah.
They
That's why
didn't
they
want,
have confessions. It had nothing to do with the vicars of Christ. They wanted to
no.
find if you're naughty or nice. I
Yeah, they
have
wanted all the dirt.
Yes, I have to bring you back. But I was raised Catholic. I always knew that. I never told. Whenever I went in there, I had some uniform thing like stole a cookie.
I
You know,
stole a cookie.
I never
Nice one.
shared anything with the priest. But I want to first. I want to say we must bring you back for a part 2 to talk about, and then a 3 and a 4. I got to keep you as a regular. I do want to really do that because it was so great to have you on Esoteric Thoughts.
Mm,
You know, rest in power, rest in peace to our friend Esoteric. And so I was
absolutely.
like, I got to get you on. And finally, sending smoke signals to you because you don't have any, as you say, high tech communication. It was like calling down the gods, trying to get Ralph in touch with Ralph. But Ralph, I want to say thank you so much. This was a great build, and you know, I jumped in here and there because you know sometimes I like to let you know
Oh,
I
that's
know.
good.
But let's do this soon. I'll talk to you a bit behind the scenes about it. But I want to tell everyone thank you for joining. Please get at least 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of this teacher and this I call you a detective, this detective and code breakers books. He has what I love about your work, Ralph, is that there is actual historical and archaeological hard cold hard evidence to these books, to the Bible, to these stories that you can get. And he's done a lot of research for you. So thank you so much, and peace and honor to you. And thank you to the family for tuning in. Peace to the darkest minds of the light. You know why I call them the darkest minds of the light?
No.
Because they go deep, profound. The deeper you go, it's dark, and then you're enlightened, when you go when you really get the information. So you are definitely
Indeed, yes.
one of the darkest minds of the light. Thank you so much, Ralph Ellis. And we'll talk to
Pleasure.
you next time. Peace. Peace,
Indeed,
everyone.
yes.